Okay, we are live.
All right, good afternoon and welcome to the House Environment Committee. We are beginning a hearing, continuing talking about draft request 250967, draft 3.1 with edits from the Agency of Natural Resources that we're going to walk through with our legislative council.
With legislative council, you should have the draft from the deputy commissioner. It's on your website. You can go to page 3 of that document. You'll see highlighting on line 12, but that's not really proposed for change by DEC. That's just indicating that extension of the date for the 3-acre permit requirement in Champlain and Memphremagog watersheds. The next highlighted language is a proposal from DEC. It is amending the 3-acre timeline for those impervious surfaces located outside of Champlain or Memphremagog watersheds. And so the proposal is to move it from 2033 to 2038 or no later than 5 years after a binding stormwater specific waste load allocation has been established, whichever occurs first.
So
Most likely 2038.
So, is that what we did for this first TMDL on the west side was 5 years after? Where'd you get the 5-year number from, Deputy Commissioner?
Thank you. Neil Cameron, Deputy Commissioner, DEC for the record. We're just essentially looking to defer the dates in equal measure so that if the date goes into effect 2028, 5-year implementation period goes to 2023, gives the program some breathing room between the Lake Champlain and the Connecticut Riverside, plus an ability to continue to talk about funding.
Okay, but we didn't do 5 years on our side. Or we, yeah. Anyway, so 2033 was the original date?
Yes.
Okay.
And you on line 12 went from 2023 to 2028. So that is
Oh, that is
5 years.
Sorry, got it. Members have questions on that change? Okay, thanks. Oh, Representative Bartholomew.
Do we have to like it?
You don't have to
That's
like
not a
it.
question. I don't have a question. I just don't like it.
You can comment on that. Yeah, tell us what you don't like or.
Well, it just seemed, I guess I'm frustrated because every time we turn around today, someone's trying to kick the can further down the road.
There's a theme, you're right?
And that's another example. And we're supposed to be all in on this water quality stuff on both sides of the state. And I'd rather not see it get kicked down the road.
Understood. And I guess it's a compromise between. Well, I mean, there was the original bill as introduced, which wasn't even, that was just where we started, had it removed. So I hear you on that. Representative Chapin.
Debate Commissioner, can you just talk a little bit more about what you mean by needing some breathing room? The funding piece seems clearer to me, although not even particularly clear, because if implementation takes 5 years, can you just speak a little bit more about that?
Sure, I'll do my best. And, I don't believe Kevin is with us today. That's okay. There's a lot of work that goes into standing up the permit program being ready. So think about all of the mapping, modeling that's necessary to identify all the parcels preliminarily, and then go through the process of noticing those, which, as you heard, it took us a while to get the messaging out, not because we weren't doing it, because it took a while to penetrate. So what the Stormwater Program Manager, Kevin, was expressing a little bit yesterday in testimony, in particular afterwards when we were chatting about it, with the charge of bringing forward this language. Essentially, my program will get killed if I have to do, if everything is being built at the same time as I'm getting things going for 2033. So there's sort of a workload management piece there. That's what I mean.
And financing, like, this should just dovetail off if we're sunsetting, if we expect to continue to have clean water funding, at least somewhat similar to what we've had. I know we've had some extra money over the last few years, so
Right.
not regarding that, but do we actually need time to build up funding for implementing this on the other side of the watershed, or not necessarily? Just not
Well, it'll
having
be-
overlapping.
so it's any additional demand, right? So presumably everything's gonna be built out by 2038 on the Champlain Memphremagog side, which is gonna alleviate that pressure, transferring it over to, directing that pressure over to the Connecticut River watershed side. So that the funds that are being used for Champlain and Memphremagog will then sort of free up and be available. The idea of creating sort of some of the financing mechanisms that we talked about, linked deposit, those funding mechanisms could certainly live on and be ready and kind of grow as they get recapitalized through repayment.
Should we move on?
Yes.
Turn to page 4.
Yes, Representative.
Can I ask a clarification? I'm reading this paragraph and I'm listening and I'm trying to understand what it's actually saying. On page 3, 3 little I, we're supposed to establish a schedule established by the secretary shall require an owner of impervious surface subject to permitting under this subdivision to obtain coverage by the following dates. We talk about impervious surface located within Lake Champlain watershed, understood. The Lake Memphremagog watershed, understood. Or the watershed of a stormwater impaired water. What is that? What is that phrase there? Stormwater impaired water. What is that?
So there are waters around the state that, because of stormwater, are not meeting the state's water quality standards. And it's most likely because of aquatic habitat and aquatic life. They're typically in an MS4 town, but not all of them are. The Killington ones are.
Killington's right, right. So,
But you made a decision back Act 64 to prioritize them for purposes of 3 acre, along with Champlain and Memphremagog.
Okay.
Would it also cover stormwater impaired outside of those on the other side of the state?
Yes, right now it doesn't have a geographical limitation. But they're all on this side of the state.
Really?
So those are stormwater impaired waters as of now, because it could happen in the future as well.
They are those as currently, yeah.
Yes.
But
Okay.
there were 31. There's now 28, I think. And they're all pretty much on. Or did you get it down to 13?
number of MS4 communities.
No, I can't remember.
I can look that up.
Started out as 31 and then they've been chipping away.
Oh, so they are identified. I guess that's my,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
So on page 4, you had a discussion that I walked in on yesterday. It was when Kevin Burke was testifying about how to waive the impact fee under the stormwater permitting rule / manual. And this is the language that would do that. So it says notwithstanding the provisions of the stormwater permitting rule and the provisions of the general permit, which is the operating / 3 acre permit. To the contrary, secretary shall assess impact fees based on the acreage of impervious surface where compliance with 50% of the applicable permitting standards is not achieved. So it took me a little bit to digest that. So if you are achieving less than 50%, you will be assessed impact. Areas shall be determined in square feet with the total area converted to acres rounded to the nearest hundredth of an acre.
So I guess on the face of it, I get this, but then, I'm sure there's been some squabbles over whether or not a site actually has 3 acres of impervious surface, are we not now creating a whole nother level of ability to nitpick over what percent of the treatment has been completed? And that seems like a possible.
Well, you're not creating a new process. They, under the rule, there's an EFA, engineering analysis, to determine how much you can achieve. And so that would be done anyway. You're just saying if you are 50%, well, oh, we have to, is it 50% more you get the waiver, or is it under 50% or under?
If you achieve 50%.
If you achieve
of the
50%.
standards, then we would not assess the,
Or more, right?
yes.
So, I mean, that's already done.
Okay.
And so you're just waiving that fee. I have to double check. At 4.2 is 4.2 be the 3 acre?
I am going to trust that Kevin put these numbers in
Right,
correctly, but
okay.
I can chase that down while we're
Right.
checking.
Check.
Okay. So that's,
Representative Sakowitz has a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably more actually a question for the deputy secretary, but
Commissioner.
I'm I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around why we're doing this in the bill, that it seems pretty arbitrary to let some people, you know, to force some people to clean up and to let other people not clean up. And based upon the fact of whether they can actually do it on their property or not. And it seems like the whole idea of impact fees, we're kind of undermining the whole point of having them to begin with, right? Like, it just seems like, well, if you can't if you can't figure it out on your property, if there's no way to engineer it, we're just going to say, okay, don't worry about it, basically. And for folks who, for reasons of happenstance, are able to do it on their property, we tell them that they're responsible for the whole thing. And it just feels pretty arbitrary to me, whether we're, treating these homeowners, these property owners, very differently based upon, facts which don't seem to matter in terms of what we're really trying to accomplish with the whole program.
I guess what I would respond is, so if you have you've purchased a site at some point along the way, you're a business owner or you're a residential homeowner or association or whatever, and you just don't fundamentally have the feasibility to do anything or to do something.
Things about.
There is, that's what the impact fee mechanism is for, but the impact fees don't cover the cost of the pounds that are not necessarily achieved on that site. So somewhere along the line, you have to sort of make a determination as to what's the threshold of, what can be acceptable or good enough based on the engineering feasibility analysis. Now, we're hearing from stakeholders, your constituents, that, these are adding sort of a layer of hardship on top of a layer of hardship. So you've got to build something, and then because you don't meet a certain percentage of the treatment requirement, then you also pay into the impact fees. So that's a double whammy. That is why we brought that forward as an opportunity to alleviate some of the concern that landowners are facing to comply here. And what Kevin has proposed, I think is a good one. It kind of cuts down the middle. It doesn't eliminate them entirely, but it allows an owner, to engineer the best they can for the site that they can do that and not also have to pay into the impact fee pot on top.
Yeah, I mean, is it a double whammy, or are we really just expecting everybody who's contributing to the pollution to pay their fair share? And we're telling certain people, you don't have to pay your fair share. Because at the end of the day, it seems like the real impact, if you're doing any work at all, the real impact for everybody total is not so much whether they're having to do the work and then having to pay the fee. It's really just what is it really costing, out of pocket at the end of the day. And we're telling some people that they're contributing, the same amount of pollution as somebody else, but it's not going to cost them as much for some happenstance that they have no control over.
So one additional piece I'll offer is that right now, the way it's established, and these percentages vary based on 3 different treatment standards in the rule. And I'll get over my skis too quick if I try and dive into it. But right now, it's generally speaking, you have to get to 75%. And if you get to 75%, no impact fees. Or if you're in a stormwater impaired watershed, as we heard about with the folks from Rutland, then it's 100% for the water volume protection. If a site just fundamentally can't do that because of the way the site was designed many years ago, or because it's completely constrained, fully pavement, surrounded by buildings, then there is, there's a fundamental fairness issue there. The folks who built at the time were building to the rules of the road at the time. So, but again, the impact fees are the rule now. And this proposal is intended to alleviate that a little bit in some of these instances where the engineering feasibility just can't quite get.
But it is a little, someone who can do it gets to pay the whole thing. Just because like they have to construct the whole, whatever the engineer designs on their property. And oops, I can only do half, so I don't have, only have to pay $50,000 instead of $100,000 just because, and then they don't have to contribute to helping others do it. Representative Chapin.
I think what I hear, I don't remember hearing from folks outside of DEC much about the impact fees, if at all. We're hearing lots of equity issues around 3-acre in general. I didn't hear people come in and be like, if you could just get rid of the impact fees for those of us who are doing as much as we can. I just didn't hear that. I hear from within DEC who are managing these programs and working with folks who are trying to follow the law and the regulations that it's really hard to ask for more money after folks have put in huge amounts of money towards engineering and then implementation, and that assessing some additional impact fees doesn't feel good. And I can fully relate to that. And so I appreciate that DEC is saying, like, let's do something about that. It doesn't feel particularly useful or kind, and it's not making a big difference in the pot of money that we have. So I appreciate that, but I don't think it's getting at the equity issues that our committee wants to get at. And so I'm not sure I can support this particular piece at this particular moment, not because I don't think it might help. I'm sure it might help, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the equity issues that I think we're struggling with. So I personally would prefer not to do something like this at this moment. There's other things in the bill I do want to do because I think that they just create some space for addressing some of the bigger issues without stopping some of the work. But this piece just, I think we're struggling with a bigger equity issue that isn't going to be addressed this way. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
If I could just offer, I brought it as a proposal and it was based on what we were hearing from stakeholders and, folks that had appeared from in front of you. Mr. Shepard from Stowe mentioned it yesterday, and the folks down in Rutland at the fairgrounds also mentioned it. So, but your choice.
I can also do it. I just don't think it's getting at the thing that we're really particularly trying to get at.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I just want to say that there are thousands of Vermonters that have paid the full price up now. And how do we deal with equity with them?
I'm not sure there's thousands yet.
No.
Yeah, not many have yet.
Doesn't.
And in fact, since that's come
It
up,
was 60 in my development that had to pay $4,000 each to put stormwater.
to do a 3-acre retro.
Well, yeah.
This is reminding me, it would be really helpful to us to get a summary of like the universe, I think we have it. If you could just tell me whose name it would be under if we already have it, of like how many, the 671, however many, and then that, I can't find the table in the witness testimony, so I don't know who submitted it. It's not under your name, it's not under Kevin's name, so I can't find it. But then also the dollars, sort of the private dollars spent. We have a lot of the public dollars spent, but what are the private dollars spent? That'd be really helpful. I think we should move on unless someone has another comment on this idea
Okay.
for now.
You can go to page 8 and 9. On page 8, top of page, line 2. Remember, the programs that were called grant programs are now going to have some creative financing opportunities. They're not just going to be limited to grants. And so that change on page 8, line 2, for purposes of the municipal stormwater implementation program. And then on page 9, top of the page, line 2, that was just a correction of a cross-reference that I made previously. And then on page 9, lines 15 through 20, this is in the priority, tier 2 priority of the Clean Water Fund recommendation to the governor and the General Assembly. The existing tier 2 has the municipal stormwater implementation program in it, and it would be amended to include at least 1 million annually for costs of complying with permitting requirements under subdivision 1264C7, which is the 3-acre, including for subdivisions when the municipality assumes full legal responsibility. You'll see that this replaces the language where it had been in the previous draft, residential subdivisions when a municipality assumes full legal responsibility. I think this is, I think the agency had some concerns of specifically and solely prioritizing the residential subdivisions.
So I appreciate this as well, but I also wonder about the subdivisions that are in towns that don't and won't help them. And what are they're sort of left out hanging on their own. Yeah.
That is where the study committee on the regional stormwater utilities would weigh in.
Okay, so we're offering them for now a delayed timeline and the sort of hope that we are going to have regional stormwater utilities.
Yes. I get how that lands, and the folks from Green Mountain Water Environment were in yesterday talking about some of their ideas around how to, and also from the league, the municipalities to be able to help out. So in addition to the ideas that they raised, Gianna Petito also talked to you about sort of the idea of a municipal incentive payment, which we could do under these mechanisms in order to have them bring those residential subdivisions in. So there's different tools that we can exercise, trying not to get too prescriptive in statute.
Well, you seem to have a response.
Also,
Okay.
Also, the Clean Water Board in the current budget proposal for SFY 26 has identified an initial investment in $1 million, more than that, 2 million and change initial investment for financing that would go into 3-acre stormwater or private access to clean water money. And that would be in the form of a linked deposit program, which Gianna had talked about and Emily Bird had talked about a little bit before.
And that's already underway and doesn't need any statutory change.
Right, and that already exists under the tier 3, the developed lands program. So what these dollars do is if a municipality can help out a site, that brings that site up into tier 2. That doesn't mean there's no money available at all, or that they're wrong word, that they're stranded, right? Then the developed lands, tier 3 developed lands program would apply.
Do your suggestions integrate any of the things you talked about? You just said 3 different people suggested ways of incentivizing municipalities to get involved. This is one. Here is this. So are there others that you would add?
So there are 2 others. I'm glad you asked that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the league yesterday brought up some liability considerations. As I've expressed to you before, I'm way outside of my ken talking about, you know, the legal aspects of liability protection for municipalities or intermunicipal MOAs with homeowners associations. So if those ideas are good, that's very interesting. We'll take no position on it. That's not in this bill yet. The second, what you heard from Green Mountain Water Environment is the idea that a municipality would be responsible for their impervious if that impervious transects a 3-acre site, and it would separate the co-application that is required now. That's something that we'd like to talk to them about, and we've been dialoguing about, but I think it needs a little bit more discussion than we can get by the end of this week. But I've been in contact with Green Mountain Water Environment, which recently is today, this afternoon, you know, about, so assuming this bill moves along, that we can have that conversation between now and when things get tidied up on the other side.
Is that what happens over there? Sorry.
Maybe I put my foot in my mouth in the bad way. I don't mean that. But of course, there's a whole, you know, parallel dialogue. So,
Yes.
Could I talk about the liability issue a little bit? I heard that the league said, oh, if somebody's driving along and drives off the road into the stormwater ditch, then the municipality is going to be, well, they're not going to bring the cause of action for their damages based on the stormwater ditch. They're going to bring it on some other basis. And municipalities have sovereign immunity in Vermont. We're one of the few states that municipalities still retain sovereign immunity for tort liability. So let's leave tort liability out over there, because that's municipalities are sovereign immune. What you're talking about is regulatory liability, right? That they are regulatorily liable to A&R, to the state, for permitting 3-acre MS4 wastewater. They're concerned that if they become a co-applicant, they are voluntarily subjecting themselves to additional regulatory liability. And ownership of a facility or infrastructure, et cetera, also creates liability potentially to other people. When you're a co-applicant with private applicants, you lose some of your sovereign immunity. So you have to think there's a spectrum of liability that they're talking about. And so driving off the road, somebody gets hurt in a car accident, that's a tort liability. That's sovereign immunity. You can try to sue the road manager, which I just read a case about last night, so that's why I'm saying it. But the municipality has to represent the road manager, and the municipality has a bunch of defenses for the road manager, and it's like, let's leave that off the table. That's not what you're talking about here. You're talking about regulatory liability and what being a co-applicant means. So the Green Water Association, people were talking about, if we become a co-applicant, then the private entities walk away, private property owners walk away and leave us with the liability. I said to them, well, you just assess them. And it's like, yes, we can assess them, but what if they don't pay the assessment? Then you put a lien on their property. It's like, oh, don't want to do that. Well, you do that every year when people don't pay their property taxes. And just like, yeah, but it's not politically popular. And I'm like,
Kidding.
yeah, that's true. I get that. And if they were co-applicants and people were trying to walk away from their liability, it's just that it's administratively burdensome. You have to engage in that process, which is not fun. And it's not politically popular.
And towns are doing it, as we've talked about already. They're already helping their residents comply, some towns. All right,
So moving to page 10. This is just a change from where it says grant program to program. And then page 10, lines 13 to 14 again. Instead of it being specifically and solely residential subdivisions, it's including for residential subdivisions. And the next change is on page 13. And this is in the Regional Stormwater Study Committee. Instead of it proposing how they're going to be eligible for Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund awards, how they are going to access state level financial assistance for the design, construction, and operation maintenance of regulatory and non-regulatory stormwater systems, including the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. And then the next change is page 19. And this is a date. Neil originally said the 2026. I'm like, oh, Neil, yeah. And now it's 2027. So yeah, I think this is a big issue. I think it will take more time than maybe you would initially expect. There are a lot of issues with how you do this.
Representative Morris.
Yeah, the date for the study committee shall cease to exist, number 4.
Yeah, that needs to change and Neil pointed that out. It's not just,
Okay.
it's separately, it's still just not in this draft.
Okay, members, do you have questions on sections, or I think, Michael, maybe just high level section by section, we could go through and remind the whole committee what's happening in each section?
Sure. Section 1, you're in the stormwater section in the water resources chapter. Page 2, you're allowing municipalities to assume full legal responsibility of the stormwater system and assess municipal impact fees, provided that a majority of those who are going to be assessed agreed and the assessment is fair. Moving on to page 3, this is the schedule for the 3-acre permit. You're moving out in Champlain and Memphremagog from 2023 to 2028. And then depending on what you do agree to on lines 14 and 15, if you're going to agree to push outside of Memphremagog and Champlain and the stormwater impaired waters to 2038, or if a wastewater allocation is established, whichever occurs first.
Can I just ask, again, I'm sorry, Chair,
Okay, yes.
how did we come up with the 2028 date? Because we're pushing out
Well, it's 2025 now, so we're adding 3 years from now, right? So I guess, how do we come up with that date? It's a great question.
was that something that we came up with, or?
I think it was something that
I
was,
think it was something that was in Senator Chittenden's bill. And that he was looking for.
and it is a little confusing and worth remembering that the dates line up with a registration process, right? And then and I'd like one of you to just walk us through the timeline for a landowner. You had to kind of register, then you have to get your permit, and so. And then construct.
The timeline for our property owner is going to be different depending on the site conditions. But I think just say those that were required to provide notice of intent to operate under the general permit, they had until 23 to do that. And if they did that, then they were gonna, in some municipalities, get help to do their engineering analysis, and that help came partly through A&R.
And that's this 2023 date?
That's that 20
Notice of intent.
date. Now, if you move it down to 2028, you probably open up availability for those people that didn't apply or issue their NOI by 2023. And you might provide some additional assistance to do engineering in that time frame as well.
But our sort of the 5 million in this sort of set aside you're creating to address this doesn't happen until 2027. Yes.
Correct. In addition to that, as I said, the Clean Water Board has carved out dollars to go into link deposit in SFY 26. And so then this would set the stage for the board to, you know, propose that $5 million for SFY 27. At the same time, there are other mechanisms, as Ledge Council mentioned, that we have been working to bring to bear. State revolving loan fund. We made a lot of options available for folks to partner with municipalities and or to access funding. So we'll continue to do that. I think from a super high level, the timeline, once you've obtained your permit, you have 5 years to construct.
And is the notice of intent, though, you get your permit after that? You have to do
Essentially, the
engineering feasibility.
The notice of intent is essentially when you filed that in full, you're noticing your intent to comply with the permit, you receive a permit. The notice of intent has the engineering feasibility analysis, the application fees, and then, you know, the stormwater program reviews it, says, yes, you get your permit, boom, 5 years to construct.
So, but your notice of intent doesn't include your engineering feasibility analysis.
No, it's basically you're saying you're
I get it.
availing
I have to do this.
you're availing yourself of the general permit and what has to be done under the general permit, which includes the EFA, which includes design, and it includes construction.
Chair Sheldon, you might also be thinking of a mechanism we had in place earlier on where folks could do sort of a pre-notice of intent to apply.
Mhm.
And then, you know, that would kind of set the ball rolling and actually make them eligible for some funding. Then they would come in with their notice of intent to comply with the full application materials that we needed. I think a phone may be giving me some guidance here, and I'll probably just go ahead and take it.
But I do think that the timelines matter. Go ahead.
The timelines do matter. That's what I was going to stress. So the timelines do matter, and we are, if we are ultimately really interested in that a stormwater utility, regional stormwater utility, and that date got pushed out. I'm wondering if we could.
That's a study.
Yeah, but I know, but that is what's driving the feasibility of actually doing that. And I'm wondering if we can, if we could relieve A&R of some of the nominal work of permitting for the 3 acre for a time period, and that would allow them to pull that date in. In other words, pull that date in so that we could then at that point refocus the whole thing toward
The
regional
utility.
stormwater, regional utilities. I
What
don't
do you mean
know,
by pull in a date?
make it sooner, make it earlier.
The report date?
In other words, leave it where, if we go all the way to the end where that date at the very end of the report got pushed out to 27. Leave it where it was at 26. And
But what would you relieve them of? I mean,
in the meantime, maybe just say, rather than just pushing the 2028 date out, say that until that 2026 date, because we're not accepting any new applications for permitting. To relieve A&R, relieve DEC of having to process those and instead just focus their effort on this study of setting up the water management districts, municipal.
regional utilities.
Regional utilities, thank you, regional stormwater utility. Am I making sense?
I can't see Neil. I guess I don't know enough about the intricacies of what's what's required, but my sense is that you don't want to pump the brakes on investments that are already underway and processes that are in place. But you're saying don't accept any new permits. But we're still telling people they need to comply. So that gets a little confusing. But I don't know how that timing.
There are, I think some of the unintended consequences that I thought might exist, so a couple more of them have come to light in my mind, but I would caution against signaling, the General Assembly signaling that we're going to cease to operate the 3-acre program even for a period of time. I think that invites EPA's engagement in this space. I think it could invite a pretty high degree of scrutiny from some partner organizations, possibly call into question whether we're actually going to be able to meet the reasonable assurance of the TMDL. And then,
Representative Austin.
I was thinking the EPA.
Okay, let's move through this and then there's a lot to happen after. So
Okay, page 4 is the language about impact fees. It's amending language that allows the agency to assess impact fees. I won't go through the whole 50%, et cetera, et cetera.
thank you.
Section 2 is the repeal of the property transfer tax surcharge, or the repeal of the sunset on that. Section 3 is a conforming amendment to the purpose section in a couple of different bills. Section 4 is also, Section 5 is also. And then you come to Section 6. This is a grant program, existing grant program that you would amend, develop lands implementation program, so that it would not just be grants, but creative financial assistance. It would not be predicated on a clean water service provider in the watershed achieving its annual goals. And it would be available for a permit renewal under a couple of different stormwater permitting requirements. 928 is municipal stormwater implementation program. Again, it's not going to be a grant program. It's a financial assistance program. Again, it's not going to be predicated on your clean water service provider meeting their annual goals. And it's available to a municipality to comply with a permit for impervious surface of 3 acres or more for a residential subdivision when the municipality assumes full legal responsibility. And then Section 7 is the priorities for the Clean Water Fund Board recommendation to the governor and the General Assembly. You were just looking at the language on page 9, lines 15 through 20, the municipal stormwater implementation program for costs of complying with the permitting, stormwater permitting.
Yes.
Can I just confirm? So now we're earlier version of this, we were changing some priorities. In this version, we're not moving any priorities up a level.
You're not moving priorities, but you're taking away some of the criteria that might have restricted how the existing grant programs were being moved, and now providing creative financing, and you're in one instance requiring at least $1 million annually go out. So you're setting a floor for that program. So next big section, page 10, line 9, section 8, appropriation from the Clean Water Fund in fiscal year 2027 for the municipal stormwater implementation program, $5 million. for permitting under 1264C7, which is 3 acre, including for residential subdivisions.
Is that really an appropriation? Because that fund exists and it's really just directing them to use 5 million of a fund that's,
So the Clean Water Fund is not a fund where direct appropriations are made from it.
right?
It's a recommendation on how to the General Assembly on how to appropriate money from it. So you do basically, it is an appropriation. And they don't have to comply with this, by the way. Because from fiscal year to fiscal year, if you read the budget, the budget has lead in language that says it only applies to this fiscal year unless otherwise indicated in that document. So they cannot withstand this if they want to.
More like a statement.
It is.
Yeah.
Section 9 is that language that the stormwater utilities municipalities want to changes on how they set their equivalent residential unit. They want it based on median, or at least the alternative to base it on the median area of impervious surface. Section 10 is the study committee on creating the regional stormwater utilities. I'm not sure if you addressed that question on page 12 on representation. The league, the MS4 member, or the small member, or all, or none, or some other combination.
I'm sorry, what the question was?
There are currently 7 people on the committee. There was a question whether or not there were too many municipal representatives, whether there should be maybe a homeowner. And if you added another person, it would be an 8-member committee, and I don't recommend that because I staff those committees and it's nothing comes with them.
Okay, so I think that there's two, that question of who should be on the committee. We talked, Representative Tagliavia was making a pitch for a smaller town than 2,500. But I remember we discussed,
Line item 4,
right,
because yes,
and then I know what that does. What does that do?
What's what?
I'm just asking Representative Tagliavia.
just give the little guy a seat at the table.
Yeah,
The smaller town have a voice.
Should it be homeowner?
yeah, I'm wondering about a homeowner.
Homeowner from small town?
Well,
Subject to 3 acre.
be a bad idea.
Yeah, or homeowner subject to 3 acre. The thing is, many of the 3 acres are in larger towns. By definition or by function. I mean, it's just the reality of it. That's why, I think that's why I'm hesitating around worrying about the size of the town versus the perspective at the table. What if we try on a resident of a subdivision,
And that replaces which one?
number 4,
Okay.
subject to 3 acre. And then members, I think we need to make a decision about the impact fee section.
Isn't the whole purpose of the, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
The purpose of the committee is to is to construct these regional stormwater utility districts, and so that it's almost like going past the 3 acre. So I don't know if the person needs to have necessarily 3 acres familiarity to be on that board, but just more like you say, being from a small town, because the small towns are affected just like the larger towns are. but wouldn't have MS4 or wouldn't have a municipality that's willing to get involved, things like that, so.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it isn't ultimately the purpose of these, regional stormwater utility districts to manage stormwater at that county-ish level, right?
Or at the municipality level. Yeah, if that's using that line of thinking, then a representative municipality would make more sense. If you're talking about stormwater utility, rather than just be nice to have somebody who's subject to this homeowner, but for the subject purpose of a utility, a representative who might have some sort of responsibility with respect to stormwater for the whole municipality would be a better idea.
So what are you suggesting?
Nine members.
Keeping this.
I think we keep it the way it's written right now.
Okay,
I think we keep it the way it's written.
So we don't want like a town manager that's implementing a municipality.
well, this says a representative of a municipality, subject to number 3.
And
Number 3.
Okay.
which one is that?
What page you?
Page 12, line 13.
Yeah.
Or,
Page.
If 2,500 is too small, you can pick 3,000 or 4,000, just, you know, not a whole lot of towns are 2,500.
Shaded, they're not yellow. Correct.
Especially the ones with 3 acre subject.
Whether they're subject to 3 acre or not.
Or isn't someone who's implemented, who's responsible?
number 3 is a representative of a municipality subject to their municipal MS4. So those people have done basically a stormwater utility, that like they're at the table for that reason to bring their experience.
They have some mechanism to manage their stormwater, and they usually have a revenue collection source of revenue as well.
Okay, so let's leave that the way it is and then go back to the impact fees page. Early on, page 4. We've heard from a few members. What are folks generally thinking about this section?
It doesn't seem to be
Fair.
treating people fairly.
Yeah.
They're in the same basic situation.
Yeah, like a little cart before the horse too. Okay.
Did he say?
He said, oh, say again.
Well,
Will.
I said it just doesn't seem like it treats people in similar situations fairly.
And I think we have enough other mechanisms in here to pause and finance and then look at utilities. So I think we'll take this section out. So hoping, I guess I also want to address that we did have a discussion. We haven't had a chance to hear your thoughts on a very large question that was floated earlier today about what happens if we pump the brakes more and explore meeting the TMDL in other ways. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Remember, the TMDL is not Vermont's TMDL. It is EPA's TMDL. The EPA was kind enough to agree to allow Vermont to implement that TMDL through Vermont's laws instead of EPA's laws. If you pump the brakes, especially if you pump it too long, you're likely to either inspire the ire of EPA. And let's assume with this administration that they're not going to get that angry. Well, then you're going to inspire the advocates. And the advocates have already proven that they can petition and sue and win to reopen the TMDL. If they reopen the TMDL, you're back at the question of who implements it. And if the state is not doing so, then EPA is likely not going to be kind enough then to agree to let the state do it then. So EPA would then have to use its regulatory authority to implement the TMDL. And that means its permitting authority. And I want to make a point that I don't think Neil made earlier. Neil said that they have permitting authority for wastewater and MS4 and farms and industrial discharge, stormwater. They have all of that. They also have something called residual designation authority. That allows them to assess any discharge and any runoff that is contributing to an impaired water and then require a permit for that. You have a list of 600 properties that have already been identified as being contributing to water quality. EPA just comes in and says residual designation authority, all those 3-acre properties, they have to get a permit. EPA doesn't care about cost. Cost is not something that they look at the TMDL level when they are doing it. Everybody that's on the 3-acre list, they're going to be on the 3-acre list with EPA too. So I don't know what you achieve. I honestly don't know if it will be better. It probably could be worse. And let's also talk about, and I love this because it scares the Jesus out of me. So back when TMDLs were first really being litigated and states weren't doing them and advocates got involved, it was the 90s, end of the 90s, early 2000s. There were 2 big cases that got litigated. One was the Anacostia River. DC just was doing nothing, and it's like you can't imagine the stuff that was floating in the river in DC and Anacostia. I lived there at the time, and it was like bodies, and and then the other big one was out in Montana, and it's like there were a bunch of river segments out in Montana. The waters generally were good, but there were certain segments that were impacted by certain industries and certain conditions. But Montana just wasn't doing anything. So sued out in Montana, Friends of the Wild Swan sued, you haven't been doing your TMDLs. Court said, yeah, you're right, and they should have been doing them, they should have been doing them over the last 5 years. So here we go. Montana, you have to issue all 28 TMDLs in 18 months. If not, then the court was going to do it. I'm like, oh, you don't want to be in that situation. Anacostia, they were like, DC, Maryland, Virginia, you all have to do this. You all have to do it within 2 years, and it has to have achievable metrics. Like, I mean, the DC government was like, oh, they were really concerned. And you don't want the courts to be ordering what you have to do. I just want you to know that that's kind of if you play too much with when and how you implement, you're inviting litigation and you're potentially inviting the courts to get involved like they did back in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And it scared people. It scared people what the courts were doing. I mean, I vividly remember reading the Friends of the Wild Swan case when it came out, and I'm just like, this is just impossible. It's impossible. And so.
You don't think it's advisable? I'm getting.
I would be pretty anxious about it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Representative.
Yeah, this weekend I read through H 146, which is, the bill that the EPA has, where they turned over authority from agriculture to the to the Agency of Natural Resources. And it was like 45 pages of regulations. This is from the EPA. This is like the EPA got tired of waiting, for agriculture to clean up. Well, you must know.
This is our bill. We walked
know.
through it in this committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't believe I thought I was done with the regulations and there was still like 7 more pages, one line of regulations. So, that was really concerning to me.
Representative Chapin.
I guess I just want to express that I think we haven't addressed an equity issue that we're all feeling like we want to get at more. I think this bill is a good bill and addresses some things immediately and gives more space and time. And it doesn't preclude us from continuing to talk about how to get at the equity issue. I don't see any reason or to sort of, walk down a path that jeopardizes our TMDL, frankly. But I do think we have more work to do. And personally, I would encourage us to think about passing this now and continuing to work on this issue this session. We're still at the beginning of a biennium, and I think people are going to continue to do these projects. People have been doing these projects. These projects take years and years. And I think I hope we will commit to however we figure out how to address some of these equity issues, if we are able to further down the road, that we'll be looking at it retroactively. We've discussed that in a number of ways. And so with more projects continuing to go, I would hope if we make a change that somehow makes it cheaper or more reasonable or a better process for folks who still have to comply with 3 acre in the future, that we'd be looking at it retroactively. So there's no reason to pause on the work that's already underway with all the 3 acre projects that are underway. That's sort of my wish.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I'd like to clarify the idea for me of having the stormwater utilities is a way of getting at our equity issue. And I want to be assured from Deputy Commissioner and Legislative Council that I have this right, where if we set up stormwater utilities, then everyone actually really is in. If it's a regional stormwater utility, and then would we also be providing stormwater management services to a larger universe, not just people who happen to be in subdivisions that trigger 3 acres? Like, one of the things that's challenging for us is this idea that you could have 2 subdivisions next to each other, one of which triggers the 3 acre and another one doesn't, and they're both adding to stormwater problems. Would the stormwater utilities help us bring everybody in and address all of that, as opposed to just people who sort of somewhat arbitrarily trigger a 3 acre rule? Do I have that right? Can we assure that in the study if it's not right?
I mean, that's what they do. To say that that's what they're intended to do. They do prioritize like any municipality, because they're municipalities. When you create a regional utility, it's a municipality. And they will prioritize acts just like any other municipality will do, but their services are generally available to all persons, all properties within the district. And when you look at some of the examples nationally, Ohio, and they have pretty large regional utilities, or Colorado, what they call the water districts. They're large, but their services are there. They usually have representatives from every municipality that's a member of their district on some sort of governing board. So there is advocacy for, everyone, a representation for everyone. Some of the equity issues still exist because you have to think about how you collect your revenue to run your utility in more rural areas. When you have a rural area versus in an urban area within your same district, there can be some equity issues still. But I mean, they are there to serve the persons and properties within their district.
So would they still be tied to the 3-acre requirement? Or would they be untethered and just dealing with stormwater pollution from development?
I think if you're gonna move a utility structure, regional utility structure, at that time, you're probably gonna want to revisit some of the permitting requirements. For example, you have a regional utility model in Vermont, it's the solid waste districts.
Hmm.
And when you created them, you said you have to do certain things, solid waste districts. And they do them. And they do them. And they do them for all of the people in their districts. Household hazardous waste, provide for some sort of solid waste management. You can, when you create these entities, you can enable them to do certain things. Or mandate that they do certain things.
Your thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I'm not an expert in utilities, as I expressed previously. What this bill immediately allows is for a municipality to do those special assessment districts. Ultimately, we create a stormwater utility at a regional scale. As long as the municipality is, accepting of it, that regional utility can take care of the residents in that municipality. Nominally, that regional stormwater utility has some sort of a fee levying authority, right? So that they can pull fees and then they can borrow money from the SRF as a municipality would. Whether we add in additional regulated entities, I'm not sure whether we require additional retrofit on other properties, for example. I'm not sure that's where we would want to go. But whether we ask a larger universe of folks to help pay for the costs, I mean, I think that's the elegance of a regional stormwater utility.
But also, wouldn't it, these cases we've seen, the Richmond example of an upstream subdivision clearly contributing to a downstream subdivision, but the upstream one didn't trigger.
Right.
That's
So
how does that get addressed?
Well, so that's what I'm offering is that upstream residential, neighborhood in Richmond could be part of a much larger palette of people helping to pay for the stormwater that ultimately is triggering that downstream 3-acre site.
Yeah.
And that's a very technical analysis that would, that utility would undertake in conjunction with the stormwater program. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that I think, as I said in earlier testimony, need to be talked through. And hence why, not ready to propose a structure right here and now, right?
Okay. Representative
What
Ross.
happens to all the people that have invested, paid for, stormwater?
Well, that's part of what I'd like to know is I'd like to get a handle on how many all of those people are really. I think a list and an understanding, and I think we asked Kevin for it. I'm not sure. Maybe
I think you've received a list and,
I don't know if it came in under someone else's name, but we have nothing listed under Kevin Burke as far as I could find on our webpage. So I don't know if someone else submitted it or what happened to it, but I can't find it.
the team, if we have not yet submitted it, it's because the team is still working on it. So
We're gonna need that information. Okay,
Is that list of 670, all 677 sites and their statuses and how much they've
It
paid?
could be that list, but I'm really, what we're interested in are the list of private properties who've gotten public assistance to do kind of anything in the stage of here. How many have designed, how many are constructed? We know constructed are very few, but then how did they finance them? I'm not sure how many of those. I know of the one that got publicity up in Chittenden County, was a commercial development that it was 50-50, I think, like.
That's
so-
the one I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so that one, okay, that's one, but they got 50% cost share and they're a commercial development. So I think we need to understand the universe. I don't think it's a big one.
How far back would you go? Because
Well, this all just started, the 3 acre. Yeah,
We absolutely have the list of sites that are receiving, the ARPA funding or other funding.
that's what we would like.
So we do have that. What we may not necessarily have without investing a fair bit of extra digging is what the total cost might be to construct for something that's permitted, but it hasn't moved to construction yet. So it hasn't bidded yet, for example. Or in an instance where a private entity went forward and went ahead and constructed and then certified with us that they did, we may not necessarily know how much they paid to get it done.
But it'd be curious to know how many of those have done that. Whether we know how much it costs, we'd like to know if they've done it.
Right.
How many people?
There are only very few that have constructed. I think the number is 7 that have done it.
That's what we.
But absolutely, the ones that are publicly financed, not a problem.
And then since we're on this topic, another member asked me on the floor today about that A&R is, there was a perception out there that A&R's requirement to pick the contractor to complete construction was holding things up. And that you all, so it's a development that had a design project ready to go, wasn't able to move forward with a contractor.
Because A&R was in a position of approving that contract?
Sounded like it, but
It sounds like maybe a misunderstanding of the situation.
yeah.
It sounds like they didn't approve the EFA or the design.
If it's a 3 acre, that's possible.
Okay.
That member should get in touch with me and I'd be very happy.
No. Okay, folks, I'm hoping that we can have a new draft tomorrow with the changes we just asked for and moving toward a possible vote. Representative Bartholomew.
Are we accepting these dates?
I think we are.
A lot of nitrogen's gonna go down that river. in
Well, I
15
guess the
years.
thing for me on this compromise language, which I really appreciate, is the 5 years. I mean, I think if a TMDL comes along sooner, then we have, then it'll kick in sooner. Yeah, I hear you. It's pretty far out. Representative.
Well, how much nitrogen? You know what hasn't been answered for me through this whole thing is what we're actually, how much is being generated by these sites and how much is being reduced. I haven't heard anybody say that yet, and it's driving me nuts. It's driving me nuts.
For nitrogen?
Yeah,
For nitrogen.
Oh, no,
for anything.
we're not talking about nitrogen.
For anything. We're not any of these sites. I would like an example of one of these sites, just one, that this is how much TDML is going out. And this is how much this, after we've spent thousands and thousands of dollars, this is how much we're going to reduce. Do we have just one single example? One.
I'm sure we can do that. I believe I
Why
provided.
didn't we do that before we did this whole thing?
We do.
If I provided, sir, a table that outlined the total amount of phosphorus associated with the 3 acre permit, the total reductions that were associated with the waste load allocation side of the TMDL and the proportion of those. I'm pretty sure I submitted that to you all in my testimony.
I would say.
Yeah, we have covered that. We'll get it for you.
Just angry about this whole thing. I gotta tell you, I'm just angry about it. I'm angry at the harm that it's doing to people. And the whole thing reminds me of way back when the Gold Town started. Are you a Gold Town yet? I want to make a bumper sticker. Are you 3-acre impervious person yet? Because I just see this 677 people today, and 2 years from now, another 677, and we're just loading the thing. I'm just really concerned of what we're doing to people in this state. We're killing them. And you know, there's people that have means in this state where they can do this, but there are people, and they've identified on here, and I know they don't have the means. And there's nothing in all these changes we've made that changes that for them. Doesn't reduce their cost. You know, in the 2 people that we've had, we've identified maybe they won't have to go through all this, and we can fix it the way it is without spending all this money. We should be doing this to every single person on this list. That's our responsibility. And we're just going, here you go, conform. Well, we might get you financing a little easier. We might do this. It's wrong. It's immoral to me. And it really upsets me a lot. And it's not being addressed.
Well, I understand that you're angry, but we are actually finding a way to address it. Representative Tackley.
2 things. I think both to Representative Pritchard's question. And first is baseline. Pick any place that's undeveloped. Anywhere. I don't care. You pick it. Pick a time when we have a 2-inch rainstorm. Out in the woods. Pick a stream. Tell me how much phosphorus is going down the creek. Who's supposed to pay for it?
It's in the allocation.
What do you mean it's in the application?
It's part of the formula.
Then maybe we need to spend more time on that. So we understand
It's
that.
part of the formula. Okay. What part of the formula? Is it a part that we're exempt from?
It's contributing phosphorus, and you look at the load that's going in, and it's part of it is from undeveloped land, it's forest land, but it contributes phosphorus into Memphremagog.
Naturally occurring. It would happen if we weren't setting foot on it,
Yeah.
but
And
we're
there
still
have-
responsible for the cost of it.
There have been measures that are required, for example, harvesting timber, you have to do the accepted management practices. There are the non-regulatory programs that are hopefully going to address things like non-point source runoff from undeveloped lands to roads, because it comes off the undeveloped land and goes on a road or a ditch. And
Right, that's what I mean. And where in that, okay, we know what the baseline is. It sounds to me like still the state of Vermont is footing in a cost for something that's naturally occurring. I don't hear that this is part that we're not responsible for paying for.
that we're not,
Throughout history, there has been erosion, there has been runoff, there has been sedimentation. Even if we didn't exist here, that would be happening. So I'm saying that somebody here, these 677, the first ones who are stuck in the barrel are the ones that crash test dummies for paying for something that's naturally occurring. I'm not saying only naturally occurring, but that's, I think, part of what is Representative Pritchard's problem with the whole system. The other thing is pre-existing or something that a site that's been in existence for maybe 2 generations. Okay, before any of this stormwater stuff was even thought of. We have one, I think it's in Representative Pritchard's district, where they're a mine and they're not contributing to any sedimentation, and they've been testing their water and they're still subject to this. It's like this gotcha. And, Representative Sackwitz brings up, well, what about their fair share? They're not contributing, but they're still stuck with paying a fair share. sounds to me from everything that they just described, their fair share should be zero, but that's not what they've been told. So I have to say, I reflect Representative Pritchard's frustration.
Other members' thoughts?
Hmm?
Other members' thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering what data or information might be helpful for you.
I'm sorry.
What data or information would
I
be
just-
helpful?
I would like for some sort of a number, like Representative North did a calculation of what the cost per kilogram, I think, is. It's pretty astronomical cost. So to know what the percentage of phosphorus that's naturally running into, you pick the raw waterway, what that is and what it would naturally be if you pick 100 miles from civilization, what would it be? So we could say, well, this is happening naturally. This is not something we are going to make someone pay for because it would happen anyway.
Nominally speaking, you would expect probably between 10 and 20 micrograms per liter of phosphorus in a stream discharging from a high elevation forest. That number is going up over time due to climate change and the effects of climate change on high elevation watersheds. The way the Lake Champlain TMDL is structured is it does not require reductions below natural background concentrations. The TMDL is structured to bring the total phosphorus in the lake down just below the level at which it can maintain the water quality standards that were, passed by the DEC, adopted by the General Assembly, codified by the EPA, and adopted by state of New York and province of Quebec as well. So our reduction requirements are not to zero. All in does include the forest sector. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. A couple of the watersheds in Memphremagog, the Missisquoi watershed and the South Lake watershed, are identified by EPA as quote challenge watersheds because they have particularly high reductions necessary in order to reach the concentrations in the receiving water. So there's a lot of work to do in the forest sectors there as well.
So I'm just going to intervene and remind members that we did, and I know it was new for all of the new members. We did a lot of deep dive into the modeling and how this was created and into the TMDL. And we did a whole January basically on water and how we got here. So the information is there. I'm happy to have you reach out to either Deputy Commissioner or his team for more help on that, or Legislative Council, but I want to respect that it's 5:15 and folks need probably to go. And just if other members have thoughts on where we are with this draft, I would appreciate hearing them briefly.
Yeah, I would like a little bit more definition of what the study committee on the creation of the regional stormwater utility districts are doing.
Yeah.
With one of the things I'd like to see come out of that is what could regional stormwater utility districts do in terms of basically coming up with TMDL 2.0 or 1.1, the next version of it that would, in other words, not just limit them to existing mechanisms. For example, item number 2 here says, including how a utility could assume responsibility for permitting of property subject to the 3-acre stormwater permit. Well, I would like for them to think beyond that. I would like for them to come up with what remediation mechanisms could we come up with at the regional level that would eliminate, for example, the entire 3-acre concept, because that's just a random artificial thing that somebody came up with, and now we're stuck with it because it's in the EPA's TMDL. But if there was a way to come up with other mechanisms that would be like more all-in mechanisms rather than just you are affected, everybody else gets off scot-free. But could we do something maybe at the downstream of all of that captured in
maybe need some beavers?
Yeah, beavers or whatever the mechanism is. Something that's not just confined and restricted to the existing legislated
Thank you.
That could-
My homework for myself is to do that, look very closely at that study committee, and I'll assign that to you too.
Okay, yeah,
And great, thank you.
What would happen? It sounds like 3 acres was a arbitrary.
Well, people are saying arbitrary. It was based in science. It was looking at how much of the remaining phosphorus needed to be eliminated to meet the TMDL, and what's the threshold we needed to go to. And with the best data available, the Agency of Natural Resources looked at how do we pick up, I think it was 4% or something, right? And like, how do we make that happen? Kind of trying to affect the fewest people. But I might have that right?
In a sense, it was essentially to avoid using the residual designation authority that Ledge Council O'Grady spoke to you about, which is a tool that ANR has executed before. But here, at least, we did that forthrightly in the context of the TMDL with, full public policy discussion. Fundamentally, if certain properties needed to reduce, yet everybody were paying in, we might not be having the same dialogue, because there would be, the requirements would be a lot more alleviated for those folks that did fall into the dragnet of this residual designation. And fundamentally, it is an expression of residual designation. It's the residual reduction we're not getting from wastewater, from the roads. I'm sorry,
Everything else.
I don't mean to
Yeah.
come across.
But I also want you to finish your thought, because
Well, my thought is what would happen if you bumped it up to 5 acres?
you wouldn't meet your required reduction. Short answer. So, all right, others? Okay, great. Representative Morris.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly. My concern, and I think it follows along with some of the conversations that we just entertained with. There's locations, and I'm going to name a few specifically, like the Rutland Fairgrounds, the Richmond neighborhood, where we get upper runoff onto a lower property or whatever. As slate quarries ×2. We heard from these, and arguably, it just seems to be a little unfair if we haven't identified them as exceeding the TMDL requirements, but yet they're required to pay or mitigate or pay impact fees. And it just gets back to the fairness part of it. Is there any flexibility, and do we test these properties to know that they don't exceed, or they're at a residual level that's acceptable? And I understand what the intent of the law is for the 3 acres, is if it's 3 acres, they've got to take care of their stormwater runoff. It's just trying to get to, where does that water go? Is it fair to the whole neighborhood versus one property owner or two? And if it's not contaminating runoff, then I'm just trying to understand what's fair or what's acceptable. It's not excessive or exceeding the limits. And is there any flexibility for helping with the remediation, or not? It's not a priority.
We're creating that flexibility with this bill to help finance. The engineering feasibility analysis, presumably, if they weren't polluting, would identify that. An engineer would say, yep, there's no runoff. There's no stormwater problem here. You aren't. So the people who are being identified through an engineering feasibility analysis as having runoff have to deal with it.
That's already been brought into question twice, clearly, which makes me say, maybe there's all 677 people on the list aren't any different than the Hatticas and the John Hills. That's the whole point. These people are guilty until proven innocent. That's what this deal is.
I do like the idea of regional stormwater group. There's an impact fee that can.
Well, that's where we're headed. So we're trying to soften this and make it more flexible, provide time, and then presumably we'll be standing up stormwater utilities to bring that fairness to the process without upsetting the apple cart that's underway already. Representative Bartholomew.
I think one piece that's being ignored here in some of this discussion is if you have impervious surfaces and you can somehow measure that all of the water that's leaving your property is clean and there's no phosphorus, you still haven't controlled the water running off your property. You haven't controlled the stormwater. So when it leaves your property, what does it pick up? You haven't controlled it. It's clean when it left you, but it washed over who knows what, and it's no longer clean, and it's because the water wasn't controlled on your property. Right? Am I missing something?
That's
That's a good
So the quarry is the great example. The water may be totally clean when it leaves, but if there's a whole bunch leaving, what's it picking up? Because it wasn't controlled.
There you go. Yeah.
When you say control, you mean stays on the property eternally.
Okay.
There's more water flowing than would be natural if you didn't have that impervious surface. So even if it's clean, where did it go? Because you didn't control it.
Control it meaning, when you say control, you mean it stays on the property, it doesn't leave.
It doesn't always have to all stay on the
It wouldn't
property.
all.
It's just how it's managed reduces the flow, which flow rate, which reduces its impact, which reduces the pollution, etc.
So
like a
how much does
settlement
it
area.
flow? How much wouldn't flow if you didn't have the impervious surface? How much more is flowing and how fast is it flowing and where is it flowing? So even if it's clean, does not mean that you're not having an impact from your impervious surface.
I mean, to further that point, when this were impaired, they were impaired because of flow,
Watershed run.
right? But you can't manage the way that they didn't have a surrogate for flow. So they came up with the surrogate of sediment for those impaired waters. And that's how you measure your flow, by how much sediment you reduce in a stormwater impaired water. So flow is a big part of the stormwater impaired TMDLs.
Okay. This has been a very fruitful conversation. Thank you,
Yeah, thank you.
Legislative
all of you.
Council, and Deputy Commissioner.
Thank you,
Um,
Deputy Commissioner. Thank
Not a
you.
problem.
hopefully we'll be able to see another version of this when we have
Yeah.
half an hour with you tomorrow.
I'll have it tomorrow. I've got 231 feet up. I don't know what to do with 319.
For 319, I think we have agreement to take out the changes to the paint.
Okay.
Maybe try that one on. But we still have more. We haven't even gone a complete walkthrough of that with you, so. And we're only hearing from Billy Costa on it at 9. But thank you very much, Michael.
I'll offer that I'm unfortunately open scheduled tomorrow and probably don't need me to have additional conversation on this bill, but I won't be available to participate, unfortunately. I can ask someone from my team if you want somebody in.
Okay. All right, we're adjourned.